Plex Track is the premier pen test reporting and collaboration platform, empowering your team to spend more time hacking and less time reporting. Plex Track centralizes your data, streamlines tedious workflows, automates report building, and facilitates communication with stakeholders. To learn how you can achieve a 30% increase in efficiency and cut report cycles by up to 65%, head to securityweekly.com/Plex Track. Claim your free month of Plex Track and get your copy of the Writing a Killer Penetration Test Report Guide today. Securing your organization against today's expanding threat landscape starts with data. Data you need to analyze at scale. And that starts with Devo. Devo's cloud-native logging and security analytics platform can handle unrivaled, see-it-all amounts of data and delivers the answers you need at stop-waiting-for-it speed. All so you can confidently focus on the cyber threats that matter most. Devo. More data, more clarity, more confidence. Visit securityweekly.com/Devo to learn more. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. Subscribe to any of our shows on the podcast network. Have all of those new episodes downloaded right to your phone each and every week. Also on that page, you can join our mailing list, Discord server, follow us on social media, and our streaming platforms, which seem to be growing. I'm told we're streaming on Twitter, LinkedIn.
All the things.
Lee Neely is here with us as well. Lee has joined us. Welcome, Lee.
Hey, it's good to be here. Nice context switch from just coming out of a meeting with our federal oversight governance. I think this is going to be way more fun.
I think everyone's brain still hurt from the previous segment.
So we're relying
on Lee, whose brain doesn't hurt as much as ours, right?
It's all on you.
Cheers. We're ready to get it off to a good start.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So I did want to start, speaking of social networks, I thought it was a good place to start. Who is everyone, all of our hosts, I think I've seen most of us on Mastodon.
Yep.
Not yet. I'm holding out.
You're a holdout, Jeff?
Yep, I'm there.
Just want to wait. You're in the wait and see category.
Yeah, I'm in the wait and see.
Is Tyler?
Still trying to figure out how to use the damn thing.
Yes.
We all there's that. Right.
I'm still trying to understand it. I mean, is it like crowdsourced? So it's like the days of IRC, right?
It's it's decentralized. Twitter.
People can set up their own servers.
Yep. You join to the
Decentralized
Twitterverse.
IRC. I don't know if it's sophisticated as.
No, decentralized not IRC, decentralized Twitter, effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. More importantly, because I won this round of 5 questions.
You did.
I switched the poster behind us.
Which we can't see in
It
the
was
frame.
great.
Oh, we can see it now.
Frame,
we can see it now. Big frame, we can see it now.
Which has been, they should be side by side, really, and we should have like a counter or something.
We should have a running scoreboard. Yes.
Yes.
Someone needs to go back now through every 5 questions and score it.
Or now that we have the idea for the scoreboard, we start on the next episode.
No, but I feel like there was a point in time where we had what is your favorite hacker movie replaced the question that was not
we have a
politically
starting
correct.
point in the last year?
No, it's a couple years.
2 years,
couple
maybe.
years, yeah.
So it's not that many to count.
Anyway. I'm on infosec.exchange at Paul Acidorian all together. Larry's like hacks.
So the Matrix set.
So we're going to have to finally learn how to spell your name.
Pretty much.
At least once.
At least once. So we should we'll publicize those. I put mine. So I did the thing where I put my Mastodon link on my Twitter as I call it like it's like ghetto verification. So I mean, an attacker could have gained control of my Twitter and created the Mastodon account, I suppose. But that's I thought was good enough.
If only your account was verified.
Yeah. If only either of my accounts were verified.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not a big
believer.
It only costs
you
$16, right? I guess to verify.
Yeah, a month.
Pay money.
Yeah, I mean, you only need to really do it for 1 month, right? Because the cheese is going to slide off the cracker over there in a month anyway.
Yeah. So
anyway, I think Mastodon's pretty
I'm
cool.
on Mastodon on the Discord social server.
There you go.
Yeah.
I mean, DEF CON social server. DEFCON.social.
I'm liking it so far. I started this week and I'm dabbling and it seems to be good. So
The whole concept of the servers is it's a lot like
IRC,
like Roblox or if you think about like
Minecraft.
Minecraft, it's a little confusing that way. Like, are you supposed to be on multiple servers? Where you create your account, does it matter? Like, there's just a lot of variables.
I honestly don't think it matters, and me just guessing. But when I first started, I tried to use the official Mastodon app, and like That
It
shit was
sucks.
broke. Like, you try to click. I tried to create an account. It wouldn't let me do anything because I could only pick from like 40 servers, and they weren't the ones I wanted. So I went to the website and created an account, but it wouldn't let me log in there because every time I clicked on the log in as opposed to the sign up, it brought me to the sign up page. Like,
Yep.
they fixed the app while I was complaining about it in Slack the other day.
Yeah, and
Speaking of broken Mastodon apps,
yeah. So apparently there was a vulnerability that is described in my story number 1 that essentially. Now I didn't see. I added the story a while ago.
Is it a vulnerability though? Like
Well,
it's a non-strict what is it? Content security policy for iframes for specific variable, right?
Is it a weakness? Then it's a vulnerability.
it's kind of,
It doesn't
I think
have
it's
to be
just
a
a
technical
missing
vulnerability.
security control that we
configuration.
would
I mean, because it's kind of like a clickjacking, sorta, but not really. Like basically,
It's iframe. It's iframe
Yeah, it's
jacking.
iframes, and you can spoof a password field, and if you autofill, it can grab your password. Which kind of it begged the question for me, like, should you autofill your passwords? And this is where the security and convenience are really at odds when all of us on the show, and probably all of us listening as well, how do you get through life without a password manager? You may make decisions, risk-based decisions, about whether or not, Jeff, you use a password manager or not, or I take that to the next level and go, you choose which passwords to store in your password manager and reserve some for not storing in your password manager, which has been my approach. And then I think the other decision you have to make is how do you configure your password manager? And that there's a lot there. I mean, there's definitely have some kind of multi-factor authentication to your password manager. There's which password manager you choose, 1Password, LastPass, whatever. There's a lot more options as well. And then it's whether or not it's going to autofill. And these are all kind of related to security versus convenience. And there's also a trade-off with the autofilling too that I was thinking about when I read this particular vulnerability. And I said to myself, how much of a difference is there between autofilling versus copying and pasting? Because I'm putting a password in my copy paste buffer versus it's autofilling in the browser. I feel like there's some trade-offs here, but I'm not so sure how it plays out. But it is a very good example of security versus convenience versus I'm presented with a username and password fields. Do I want those to autofill, or do I want to go to my password manager and click the fill button manually, or do I want to just copy and paste my in there, which it ends up in my copy paste buffer?
One of those is a form element though versus a buffer which passes differently, if I remember right. And a form element has the ability to have automation with inside of HTML tags that allows abuse, if I remember right.
And I feel like password managers have tried to limit this risk with copy paste buffers and protect them in certain ways. I vaguely remember talking to, I can't remember the name of the company now, but there's another similar like LastPass 1Password company. What was the name of it? I can't think of it now.
1Password, LastPass.
There was another one.
Splashtop.
They were a sponsor on one of the shows.
Then you should really know who they are.
I should really know who they are. And they were really good. Like I talked to the founder and I'm like, you really know your stuff, and like you breed confidence in your product by the way they presented themselves and explained and answered technical questions. So I was really impressed. Mm-hmm. But in any case, I feel like they all do, because the copy paste buffer. Am I saying that right? Is it your copy paste
clipboard?
Clipboard. Thank you. I knew there was another word there for it. Your clipboard there's other protections because there have been attacks against that. Not that the protections are perfect, because they never are, but there was protections against that. So, and again, all of this is kind of like a trade-off, but I feel like it's also better than the alternative to not having a password vault, which, Jeff, I do you live without a password vault?
I live without a password vault.
And you just remember all of your passwords?
Or I don't.
Or you don't.
I mean, I have certain passwords that I use, when you're at a website somewhere and I got to register and whatnot. I have throwaway passwords that I don't care about that still are complex. But for the things I care about, I use really good long passphrases.
And you remember
and I remember them.
I can't say I can't remember them.
This attack was interesting though because
So I use a password
it did,
manager. It's
It's your hack.
brain.
Mhm.
it wasn't necessarily a vulnerability in Mastodon as much as a security configuration that wasn't being implemented, but it did rely on the user having a toolbar installed, right? So you're still relying on the social engineering side of this, or someone messing up and having a malicious code running with inside of their browser. So there is that protection, and hopefully Mastodon just gets the security settings fixed so that this is much harder to do. But that being said, like this was relying on that spoof toolbar where you click on that toolbar anywhere and it auto fills the credentials for that particular server. So
Now, Mandy,
Yes.
am I correct? Because you had some comments on this. Am I correct in assuming I looked into this a little bit, that with Twitter today, like you can pay $8 and become verified, but on Mastodon, I just have to put this special string in a special field and magically I'm verified? Am I understanding this correctly?
That's my understanding of it. So this is making me think about getting like YouTube. You know how you can get the YouTube Premium by just putting in the word in the actual web address?
Sure.
That's what this is reminding me of. Huh?
Huh.
Yeah, there's no authorization
There was no authorization.
change your status to become more trusted in an environment, basically.
in Twitter,
In
Right.
Mastodon. In other
No, in Mastodon. That he added an official TikTok username by inputting : verified :
oh, that's just
Just
the
that-
iframe field. He was able to spoof the iframe and point that source to any URL that he wanted it to. That's just one of the variables.
What I read, Tyler, is that to become verified on Mastodon, all you have to do is put : verified : in a special in one of the fields in your Mastodon configuration, and it shows a little blue checkbox and you're verified.
As a title attribute?
I forget exactly where, but I read a tutorial or two, because like I read the first one and I said to myself, this can't be the case. And then I searched some more, and then I'm like, that's the case. And then I looked on Mastodon and there was people with like 8 verified logos after it, because they must have just put verified multiple times. I'm like, oh, maybe this is how you just become verified. Like it's basically crowdsourced.
Time to verify all the accounts.
So it means just as much as Twitter at a different price.
At a different price. Not previous Twitter. There were different variations and stages of Twitter verification, all of which are very difficult waters to navigate.
Oh, yeah.
But as of the last 10 days, Twitter, and apparently historically always on Mastodon.
And it's very interesting.
What is the point of a verification on a decentralized platform, though? Like how
would you do that?
How and who would be managing that decentralization and verification?
I think the Mastodon model should follow PGP key verification, and we should have, instead of PGP key signing parties, we should have Mastodon verified parties, where we all stand around and we hold up our identification, and we have a signature.
I'm guessing it's not going to be an issue that they do anything about until politicians start getting on Mastodon or celebrities.
I was going to say, how would you do that at scale for like public figures or people that actually control
Just ask
sway?
Twitter. That was the problem with PGP, Tyler.
Yep.
So
PGP
I explained the PGP thing and the PGP key signing party and verification to my oldest son, and I told him that I had attended a PGP key signing party, and he looked at me, he's like, "Dad, you really are a nerd. Like, why does that surprise you at this point? Seriously."
See, we should just let the government handle the PGP verification, and as part of your social security number, that's definitely secured. That's your identity.
We're here from the government to verify you.
You can trust us.
Well, I would say the Mastodon verification reminds me of things that happen even in meat space. Like I remember going to a project, a construction site, and wanted to approach. It was closed, and they said, "No, who are you? We need somebody to verify. You can come on." So I went and got a guy, said, "Hey, will you come verify me?" He said, "Yeah, she needs to come on." And then they looked at me and they said, "So who is he?" And I told them who he was, and they let me on. So
that's all it was. It's all about but that's interesting, Mandy, that we talk about verification, what's the qualifications for verification, the process, and what data do you have to know in order to be verified? And the process you described, Mandy, has been implemented in various different forms, physical security certainly. And I feel like as attackers, we just say, well, okay, what do I need to do to be verified? Oh, that's it. Let me just go get the information that I need in order to pass this verification, and then I'm verified. And that is varying levels. And oftentimes, as you described, Mandy, it's not that secret or difficult of information to obtain. In this case, you just need to know : verified : That's all you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, I feel like all of those things kind of become not all of them, but there's a large majority, especially when you're dealing with people that are not vested in it being exact and precise all the time, that you get circular references. So you become the verifier by virtue of that they aren't really that invested in what's going on.
Reminds me of that old song, I'm My Own Grandpa.
I'm my own certificate authority.
Yeah.
We've talked about that. There was an article, I think last week we might not have covered, but with your example, we've talked about in the past, the Chinese Postal Service or something like that, Larry, that was a certificate authority.
Yep.
That's the extent. It's essentially an example of this extension of trust, right?
And it was listed in Windows.
Mm.
So maybe for a decentralized platform like Mastodon, we find like Switzerland or Liechtenstein. Maybe that's a business for them. They can be the verifiers for the globe. Because who cares about Switzerland?
It's interesting when we had just talked to Jesse Michael before this and talked about secure boot and the chain of trust. And in so many of these models, there has to be a top of the food chain verifier. In the case of secure boot, that is Microsoft. I have mentioned this on the show in the past, that a lot of people are unhappy about the fact that aren't using Microsoft products or software, that Microsoft is the top of the food chain verification source for secure boot. And everyone has to go to Microsoft in order to participate in secure boot. They call it a third-party CA certification program. Mm-hmm. It's interesting to think about in this concept of trust that Mastodon is just kind of thrown out the window and be like, everyone can be verified, whatever, because in a decentralized environment, it's really hard to have a central point to provide that level of verification because it's a lot of work and a lot of responsibility. I think those are two different things that have to be coupled together in order to provide a verification to say, this person is who they say they are, this software is what it says it is a difficult thing to achieve. And we have all this wonderful cryptography. Secure boot is very much reliant on public key infrastructure, but there has to be a central entity providing that verification.
Which, to be fair, like Microsoft did not appoint themselves. They did not assign themselves. Like they were voluntold, more or less, like you're kind of the best one and only one with the infrastructure and capability to do this.
And to your point,
so
Tyler,
I think
they haven't done a terrible job at it either. I don't want to poke holes at it. They really haven't. Like they have contributed to making this a secure process. And it has its pitfalls and we can poke holes at it, but Microsoft has acted in good faith, I think is what I'm trying to say in terms of preserving secure boot, which is great. Not to say it doesn't have its flaws, but we constantly improve. And we've shown examples of that.
Well, and wouldn't that, like on the Mastodon thing, my question becomes who is actually maintaining, especially the InfoSec Exchange server? Because then would it be server-based? Like
it's Jerry Bell. Jerry Bell from the Defensive Security Podcast, as far as I can tell, is like the and I'm not knocking Jerry. My assessment is so far with not a lot of research is Jerry is working very hard to maintain this environment for all of us to go, hey, look, I'm on Mastodon. I'm on this server now, and really cool things are happening, and there's not a lot of crud. There's not a lot of spam. As far as I can tell, after using it for a few days, he's doing an amazing job. My concern is what if Jerry's like, I'm kind of tired right now, or I want to pass this off to someone else, or whatever. I think Jerry because I looked into, I went to Jerry's Twitter or something, and he's going to be on a podcast I started listening to, which is hilarious. Larry, it kind of reminds me of early days of Security Weekly. Listen, the Iron Sysadmin podcast, wildly entertaining, like really kind of raw and unfiltered podcast. It reminded me of the older days on Security Weekly. They're like 130-ish episodes in, but really good. I mean, they did a whole one on should you be in the cloud, should you not be in the cloud, that I thought was a really good episode. I think Jerry's doing that podcast talking about Mastodon, so I'm definitely going to listen to that when it comes out, because I want some more insights into, because I think he's putting a lot of time into it, and he should be applauded and rewarded for that. If in nothing else than praise from all of us, like thank you for doing that, and maybe some help. Maybe some help. Maybe he needs help. If he needs help, we should give him some help.
They asked for
I'm curious why we haven't
today.
come up with the
Sam?
decentralized social media platform that allows messages just to get written to a blockchain where there is
Here we go with
it's decentralized.
If it's cryptocurrency, it's blockchain. If not, it's not blockchain, Tyler. I've shown you the graph.
That's right.
I think we have a new
graphic.
drink penalty.
You forgot the rule.
I'm calling
Anyway.
drink penalty here.
Anyway, about Mastodon, today they posted a request for people to subscribe at Patreon to fund it. So that's something we could do to help.
Sure. That's a great point, Sam.
Yeah.
I want to just touch on this libxml2 vulnerability. Is the GNOME project responsible for libxml2? When I saw the reporting structure, so my story number 2 was a GitLab thread where Maddie Stone, because this vulnerability I believe was disclosed by Google Project Zero, maybe even by Maddie herself, and they talked about the technical details behind it, how there wasn't, I believe it was an integer overflow in libxml2, which is included. I think many of us that have worked with tooling and security tooling have probably, like myself, like you've never run into a dependency issue in Linux or Python. No one's run into it. Anyone? Like raise your hand if you've been victim of a dependency issue in a Linux or open source project.
Yesterday, today, the day before that.
Today, the day before. It happens all the time.
All the time.
All the time.
What day is it?
libxml and libxml2, in my previous experience, have been the source of said dependency issues in the past. I did not know that the GNOME project was maybe responsible for that, maintaining it. And if you've ever done XML parsing, you probably use this library, and it turns out there's an integer overflow, and there's a thread. What I found interesting about this particular link is that there was a thread where the maintainers of the project were like, this is why we have this feature and how we're structuring it. There's a XML parse huge variable to allow for larger input in it, and they were talking about why that's there, whether they remove that feature or not. And the developer was like, this is why it's there, and we need this here, and this is what we want to do to protect it because we want to keep this feature. And Maddie's like, well, if you protect it in this way, I think that's really cool. And it was just great to see open source maintainers working with security researchers in a positive way to remediate this issue in this library, which, as we talk about supply chain and all of that stuff, as we said in our dependency hell that we've all been in, sometimes libxml is one of those things that sends us in dependency hell. So I thought it was great, and I have a huge amount of respect for Maddie. She's done amazing research and continues to do amazing research. She's been on a couple of different podcasts lately, and I'm a Maddie fan wholeheartedly. She's come on this show as well.
Yeah.
I agree. And I have a question on this. It's not exactly related to the what she was talking about, but I would love for any of you to talk more about the security critical projects like XMLSec.
What is XML? I've not heard of XMLSec before. I
That's
will
when
say generically on that issue that in my experience of projects that have incorporated libxml in various languages, that it's typically a library to support parsing of XML. And anytime we talk about parsing data in the context of security, typically it leads to vulnerabilities and exploits. In fact, we just explored that with Jesse in the previous segment where we talked about Dixie drivers and get variable, where they're parsing variables that are stored in NVRAM and parsing them, and there's buffer overflows. Same thing, XML related. I mean, I can relate this back to what really set off the initial kind of flag in my brain for just how prevalent parsing vulnerabilities are in general is Marty Resch talking about Snort and how Marty admitted, I am not great at writing parsers, and parsers typically breed vulnerabilities because you're taking unsanitized data and you're trying to do something with it, and inherently there's going to be a vulnerability in that. And I think there were vulnerabilities in Snort that was the context of that conversation. Like, Marty's a really smart guy. Like, I met Marty. He was one of my instructors in SANS way back in the day, 20 years ago now. And Marty was having trouble with this parsing kind of functionality. I'm like, this is a thing. This is a thing that, and now, fast forward 20 years, how many vulnerabilities have we seen in the context of parsing? This particular vulnerability is actually not, it's somewhat related to parsing, but more of an integer overflow as a result of parsing, which is usually more related to a buffer overflow, not necessarily an integer overflow, but similar kind of category. But usually parsing stuff is hard. Taking unstructured data into a program and trying to figure out whether it's expected or not expected and things of that nature leads to vulnerabilities.
Speaking of buffer overflows, Josh spread another head.
Yes. You had an overflow condition.
Yeah, which has more hair than his original head.
He does.
Well, come on. I mean, it's she definitely has more hair than me, but that's okay. That's okay.
She's cuter too, Josh.
A lot.
Oh my God, she's so much cuter than me. She's the best. Hey, Laurel, how you doing?
And she's
both of my kids have more hair than me, but that's okay. They're not going to have male pattern baldness.
This is true.
And she's like, Daddy's a nerd, and now I have to be in a podcast. Good Lord.
That face just said it was.
And I wish I could say something clever about babies are like parsing unstructured data, but I mean,
you've changed the diaper. They are.
Oh God, that's actually very true.
Yeah.
That's a lot of unstructured data. And it is data. You can parse it and go, oh, look, you were eating breast milk, but when they get older, you're like, okay, there was corn and
beets and
beets.
Something about garbage in, garbage out. Something. It's a lot of out. It's a lot of output.
The first time we fed Lily roasted beets, I almost got scared.
You almost called 911.
Oh, we had beets for dinner.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But parsing unstructured data is actually a big thing in AI/ML these days. You've got a massive amount of legal e-discovery doing it. You've got a massive amount of significant people doing it, and it's not the same thing as natural language querying or natural language processing. It's got elements of that, but it has significantly more mathematical elements in terms of non-obvious relationships. It's more seam and correlational than language processing.
I was just going to start marching down the list, and feel free to jump around or circumvent me. Put your go-to statement in there if you need to. But my story number 3 was talking about flaws in public GitHub repos can now be reported privately. I had to pause on this story when I first read it because we've covered a lot on vulnerability disclosure, discovery and disclosure issues. And when I think of reporting a bug, I always think of it as being reported privately. But when it's an open source project, I also thought, actually at first, that this could be reported in a manner that was private, potentially. But then if it's an open source project, let's say it exists on GitHub, I have to submit a GitHub issue, potentially. That would be my first. I mean, maybe you try and contact the owners of the project privately, but now you're like doing OS int to find who those people are, emailing them. Are they going to reach your email? Is that a current email? Am I going to DM them on Twitter? They're not using Twitter anymore. Whatever the case may be. So
Mastodon, are they verified or not?
Are they verified or not? But I think the
It's complicated.
So whether you're trying to do it privately and then you switch to public, and the public method is I'm going to submit a GitHub issue, that's still public. There's no... So it took me a while to work through my brain, like, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? The problem is, how do I reliably, perhaps securely, communicate a vulnerability to an open source project that's not going to be public? And then I had to think, is this a worthwhile effort? And my answer to that, after I thought about it a little bit, was yes, it is a worthwhile effort. Again, I want to relate back to Maddie Stone, who I believe in her Darknet Diaries interview talked about how a threat actor group produced marketing documentation for an exploit kit or malware kit. And based on that marketing documentation, Maddie read that and said, oh, that leads me to this point in the Android Linux kernel, and this is the vulnerability. Like, based on what they were describing in the marketing documentation, I think it's this bug, so therefore let's go fix this bug. And she fixed it, and turns out that was the vulnerability they were exploiting. So based on marketing documentation, really smart security researchers like Maddie Stone can go fix the vulnerability. If you publicly disclose or talk about a vulnerability in an open source project, and Maddie also had access to the source code, and not downplaying what she did because it's still amazing, but open source, you have everyone has access to the source code. So if I hint towards I found a vulnerability in this open source project and it's kind of this, smart people are going to go, oh, there's the vulnerability. I think some of this happened with the recent OpenSSL vulnerabilities that happened. There was enough information that was public that people could anticipate, go read the source code. In fact, I think HD Moore and company at Run Zero did some of this as well. They go, no, I think it's this particular vulnerability. This, I believe, underscores the point that we need this private disclosure for open source projects, especially because the source is open, everyone can read it. If we leak any information about what the vulnerability could be, people are going to go find. We are very curious people as hackers. We are very resourceful. We're very persistent, and we will go find that vulnerability and develop an exploit for it and figure out what it is. And if nothing else, then because it's an interesting thought exercise for us, maybe not in a malicious sense, maybe in a protection sense. HD was doing that in more of a protective context than it was a malicious context. So I think the long and the short of it is this is a worthwhile effort to be able to privately disclose vulnerabilities to open source projects so they know about it, the disclosure knows about it. We can work together in private and then push it. Once the fix is pushed, once even any information is leaked about that, everyone's going to know what the vulnerability is and the cat's out of the bag. So I think this is a good initiative.
So you go along with like the comment from Andrew Barrett from the vice president of Coldfire, because his take is basically that the private vulnerability reporting feels like an obvious solution to bring the research community together and the product community.
Yeah.
With the product community.
Agreed. Barring that, and we've been doing the show for a really long time, and I think that open source in general, in my opinion, has been really good about fixing vulnerabilities and dealing with their vulnerabilities. When a vulnerability comes up, it's a very collaborative effort. Everyone wants to make sure the right thing happens and this vulnerability gets fixed, for the most part. I mean, Linus kind of has Linus with security vulnerabilities, and he walks that line. Linus aside, 99% of the people out there in open source are like, yeah, let's get this stuff fixed. Let's do it responsibly. Let's work and let's get it done. Commercial side has gotten better over time, but more, I think, a higher likelihood that commercial closed source software could fall victim to the disclosure that ends badly, where we don't believe this is a vulnerability, we need more time. And not that any of those things, not that more time is necessarily a bad thing as long as there's some limits around it. I feel like there's more of an opportunity for commercial shenanigans to happen in commercial software. Open source tends to, in my experience, lead towards let's get this fixed in an expedient manner.
We should talk to Casey Ellis about this.
Well, he was quoted in that too. He had kind of the same
Oh, that's right.
view.
Well, Casey Ellis started Disclose.io to do that kind of thing. So
Exactly. Casey and I are on the same page on this, Josh, to your point. We've had conversations about it that hopefully everyone will be able to hear pretty soon. Put it that way.
It says here that he told the Register that GitHub is creating a workflow to facilitate the disclosure of flaws, but even more so, it's normalizing the importance of outside security feedback for FOSS maintainers and developers.
Josh, this is something that I want to take a different take on this labeling thing for IoT security. And we've touched on this in the past. And this is the nutrition label for IoT devices. We've talked about a lot on the show, in fact. I want to say the problem with labeling is, one of the problems is, I want to relate this to the nutrition label. How many times have you read a nutrition label and gone, what is that ingredient? I have to Google. I need to Google that. I have no idea. I have an example in there. What was my example? Erythritol. There was an energy drink on my desk. Erythritol was the ingredient. I'm like, I have no idea what that is. Does anyone know what erythritol is?
It's a sugar, isn't it?
It's a natural sweetener, right?
It's a
was that your guess, Mandy?
sugar.
Yeah, it's a sugar.
alcohol,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think.
But like, there's a million things you could put on a nutrition label where we're
No,
like,
I think it's a sugar alcohol. I think
a sugar alcohol. Is that how you would describe it?
right. So your
It's a
body
sugar
has,
it's a
like,
sugar
normal
derivative.
sugar.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But not everyone knows what erythritol. I mean, you folks are obviously really smart and have maybe read a lot more nutrition labels than most people.
I'm still trying to figure out what red dye number 5 is.
Red dye number
It's good for you. It's good for you.
It's good for
Again, there's a million examples. But relate that to a nutrition label for an IoT device, where your average consumer is reading a nutrition label going, does this use GNU TLS or does this use OpenSSL? And what's the difference? That could be kind of daunting for if you're not nerds like us on the show, and most of us, all of us listening, we're all nerds in a certain capacity. We understand that comparison between those two and whether, like, what is the ingredient? Which ingredient is better? We could do probably an entire segment on what type of SSL library is the best ingredient. We could have a huge debate on that. It would be the most nerdiest and probably boring to most people debate. I still want to have the debate now that I verbalized that. I think it would be kind of a fun debate to have. But
it would be fun.
But Josh, to your average consumer, I don't
it's even
know.
better. It's even better. Paul, you got to remember, like, okay, I'll give you another example. Just after World War II, there was a town in Japan. Do you know what the name of the town was?
USA.
GNU TLS?
USA. Exactly. Lee
Oh.
knows it. It was named USA. Do you know why? So everything that came out of that town could say made in USA, made in USA.
There you go.
Okay? Wait until people start naming things with GNU invisible Greek question mark in higher ASCII whatever, SSL.
But I think I think of the positive side. Let me just throw the positive side out there, and then I'll throw it out to everyone else for a debate. The positive side is, rather than looking at the individual ingredients, maybe one of the things I look at in a nutrition label is the number of ingredients. If it has an exorbitant amount of ingredients, that lowers my trust level for that particular product. Maybe knowing where the ingredients come from, where they're sourced from, is another thing that's easier to understand. The two factors of how many ingredients, where they come from, is a better metric for the average consumer rather than the individual ingredients themselves. And I think that's a positive thing that could come from a label.
Does that add cost, though? And when we're talking about IoT, the thing that consumers care about is cost and functionality, right? Even IT, you look at most IT people, we are 0.01% of people that would even care. And then again, at that point, we're generally looking at cost and functionality, and we will add the security in ourselves because we don't trust anybody anyway. So are we adding cost and a metric in which is adding confusion and false sense of security for the consumer where they think it's secure because of a number or a metric we put on there, when in reality that is dependent on the OEM, their implementation, whether or not they've coded something dumb in there, and if it's been patched, updated, and the vulnerability still exists. So really, are we adding anything by doing this?
And also, by the way, remember, as you add ingredients, as you put it, and I love that, you're reducing reliability. And NASA developed this, actually. So NASA, do you know how many components a Saturn V rocket had? There was a lot. It was a very large number. And they realized that if they put a component with 90% reliability and another component with 90% reliability together, you're like, okay, well, that's going to increase the reliability. No, it reduces it. It actually goes down to about 86% reliability. So as you increase your ingredient list, depending on the reliability of each of those components, okay, and the security of each of those components, what happens to your overall security, your overall reliability?
Yep. I want to take a little different approach to some of this labeling thing, because I think it could be a good idea. Kind of along the lines of what we saw in the early days with the Wi-Fi certified logo.
Sure. Yeah.
And
That's
those types of things.
Great analogy.
In that, I don't think this label is intended to be like the ingredient list and all that type of stuff. Because, you know, if you put on an IoT device that it has 86,000 ingredients, you forget it. Because you're probably going to find that, you know, at the core, many of these things are going to have 80,000+ ingredients.
I have a stat in here, Larry, that says your average application has X number of libraries, easily adding 10,000 lines of code to a typical application.
Yep.
To your point.
Yep. So if you were to put something that's a little bit more easily recognizable, we take it to the food analogy again, like non-GMO,
FDA certified.
USDA approved.
Is it prime? Is it prime beef or choice?
Yep. What's the difference?
Nobody knows.
Hold on.
There is a big difference.
There's a big difference.
Nobody
Prime
knows
and choice.
what the difference is.
Sure, but I couldn't tell you.
The average
people
consumer.
that nerd out and smoke a lot of meat are very hyper aware of
But that
prime
would not be.
versus
But that
choice,
would not be a good example for this audience. I want to pick up this device and say, hey, there's some modicum level, some level of security that the manufacturers of this device have gone through to ensure that I'm maybe a little bit safer than this other device over here that doesn't have the stamp on it.
I think that's quite achievable. It just has a number like a CVSS score, and it just has a compliance rule like any other compliance standard, saying like it doesn't have the OWASP top 10, something like that.
Yep, like Circle K for kosher products. Like if it's got that certification,
but to your
it's gone
example,
through
you
a
have
process.
You have to up level it though. When we're talking about IoT devices, there's a base level consumer that's shopping for the holidays right now. This says, I need to get a new whatever, a new set of headphones, a new wireless router. I want to gift someone a...
Yeah.
Do you gift wireless routers to people? I guess.
I mean,
Sure.
To my parents, yes.
Yeah. And I want to know that it has... I don't know what CVSS is. I don't know this.
No, but it has a label, like Dolphin Safe. This
Correct.
is certified safe by the U.S.
It
government.
has a
The other one
fluffy
isn't.
teddy bear. I want the fluffy teddy bear wireless router because fluffy teddy bears are warm and cuddly and
I want
soft.
Dolphin.
It's
I want a
free
dolphin.
range. It's organic.
It's free range, organic, prime choice, Angus beef.
Kosher.
Kosher.
Yep.
But again, that adds a
Vegan.
cost, right? Because someone has to certify those.
Yep.
Correct.
Well, and so that product will cost more, and if you don't want to pay it, you can buy the cheap uncertified one.
Do you want your parents, Tyler, to have cheap, uncertified Wi-Fi gear?
It depends on what kind of testing I'm
That's
doing.
a tough
on
It
question.
depends on what kind of testing I'm
But
doing.
what about your in-laws, Tyler? What do they get the cheap, uncertified?
They get wise. Like,
Yeah.
that's what the Chinese is up to.
The cheap uncertified stuff comes from Chinese vendors we're supposed to be avoiding. And I've got one of the stories there how Baidu was leaking their private key in their HTTPS. So that's what you get for not being Dolphin safe.
Hold on. Go back. Doesn't that defeat the whole purpose of?
Of course it does.
How do you
Depends on what
even?
that private
You have to go
key's
out of
going
your
for.
way to leak your.
No, what you do is you have defective hardware that makes a mistake when doing the calculation. And because the way the calculation is done, if you make a defective signature, you can factor P out of it.
So you can derive
pretty
your.
awesome.
Their HSM
Well, hold
was
on.
screwed.
What you're saying,
wasn't
Sam, is you
it was
can
their
de-
HSM that was screwed.
But
Yes.
Sam, what you're saying is you can derive your own private key.
Yes, you can leak if your hardware security module drops a bit when doing a calculation. Since you do it with the Chinese remainder theorem, you do part of it modulus P and part of it modulus Q. And if only one of them is wrong, the wrong signature you put out can be compared to the original data, and you find a factor in common, and you find P.
You just really need to mind your P's and Q's here.
What you need to do is verify your
on
signature.
purpose.
Yeah.
That sounds like a Chinese on-purpose backdoor.
No. People did it before by just lowering the processor to make errors. But the point is, you have to verify the signature before you send it out, being aware that all your hardware can get a mistake.
My point of view is I don't think this discussion from an IoT perspective is really appropriate to talk about consumers, because consumers largely don't care.
They care about features and price.
Features and price.
Well, I think in order.
Functionality. Or let's say convenience.
Or maybe it's pretty. I mean, it's pretty on par. It take everything we know about security and technology out of the picture for a moment, and think about if you're going to the store to buy a Wi-Fi device, what are you basing your purchasing decision on?
Right.
It's pretty equal kind of factors. Like you're balancing. You're balancing.
Oh, they're so cute together.
You're balancing. Been together a long time, Josh. You're balancing
for those that are on audio only.
Price and features, right? Like depending on the device, one may take precedence over the other, but they're basically you're combining those factors together,
right?
Price and features.
But the second part of my comment is, what's more appropriate is to talk about the organizations out there that are bringing IoT into companies. And what should they be looking for? Then I could see a benefit. Because they're more in the know. They're probably more inclined to look for certain things to see if something is or isn't there.
Well, I mean,
but it's kind of like I'm sorry, Jeff, but it's kind of like when I look for. I would just did because we all do this as nerds. We do like a thought exercise. We're like, what if I were to have two 49-inch curved monitors?
Ask Jim McMurray.
What would it?
That's Jim McMurray.
Jim totally Jim hurts my personal technology budget more than anyone else, because if I want to keep up with Jim, I need a much larger personal technology budget than I have today. And Jim is amazing for that, and I love him for that, because Jim will be like, what if I had 240? And I'm like, what if I want two 49-inch monitors?
And what if I turn them up on their side so they're vertical?
But what I did was I was balancing price and features. Do I need to be 144 hertz refresh rate, or can I get away with 120? How does the feature and price impact my experience? I literally this morning, because I have ADD and I'm a nerd, I was like, what if I change my monitor from 144 to 120? Do I notice a difference? And if I don't, can I get two at 120 hertz? And what's the mount that I need to put 249 is to have more screen real estate? I think it's not just features, but it's experience. How do I maximize my experience for the lowest price? And those are the primary things I think consumers are looking for, especially with technology.
Well, here, let me point something out that goes right back to your Wi-Fi analogy from earlier. Is that typically enterprises have high grade enterprise and secured Wi-Fi gear, Meraki and Cisco and Aruba and whatever else, and people at home have whatever D-Link was at Best Buy.
Oh God, no, not.
But he's right. He's not wrong.
I know, but D-Link is horrible.
But that's my point. Do you, as a corporate enterprise, do you buy D-Link? Do you buy whatever? No, of course not. But the point is that at the home users get what they can with the best bang for their buck.
Bang for their
get
buck.
my Wi-Fi out to my hammock. I'm done.
But Josh, I think you back to what I was saying earlier. Bang for your buck is price and features,
right?
And experience, feature/experience. Yeah.
And
security is not in this equation.
Even in most organizations, security is not
true
considered the way we consider it.
I think Jeff has a great point. Translate that to Josh, your enterprise example. Enterprises are also looking at features and experience and price, and security comes after that. I want these specific features. I've got a budget. I've got a certain price. Price is a factor, and then security is third.
And why is security third? Because security is driven by compliance. And security is driven by the fear of losing profit. Yes. Security is driven by the fear of getting a regulatory audit. security is driven by fear. It's
What can I get away with?
It's not a revenue center.
What can I get away with?
Yep.
Or what's the
Pretty
minimum I
scary.
need to
Sounds
do to
brutal.
get
Yes.
the box checked?
Correct.
So
Mandy's gonna comment.
I do, because I feel like the whole thing about the labeling system on IoTs, if you're looking at consumer, just average consumers, I feel like 70% of the benefit of this has nothing to do with whether or not it actually is showing that the device is more secure. But over, let's say, a span of like 6 years, my personal projection is that having that on the devices would increase the average consumer's awareness that security, or that these things are doing all of this. It would increase their awareness of that by 20 to 50%. I mean, within the mass population, which is a good thing overall. I don't feel like it has anything to do with the
But Mandy, you bring up a great point that makes me want to draw the analogy between like UL compliance and security. Should this even be a user-facing thing? I think UL exists to make sure that the TV that you buy is not going to catch fire when you install it in your house.
When's the last time you looked for well, you may not be the normal
Yes.
person, but when's the last time you looked
for the
a
UL
UL
compliance?
label on anything,
Right.
any
I think UL
electronic
compliance
that
is
you
for the
bought?
manufacturers to go, the government says, or standards bodies in the government says, you should not produce a TV that's going to catch fire, and it has to be UL compliant to be in the market. When you go shop as a user, you're not looking for UL compliance because that should be taken care of for you. That's kind of some of the arguments I hear from CISOs on multiple security fronts is, why should I even have to worry about that? I should be able to purchase products that, in this example, I put in my environment and don't catch fire. That's table stakes. I shouldn't have to worry about that. That should be someone else's problem. In this case, I think security isn't always someone else's problem. In this case, this could be a case for it is someone else's problem. I should expect that the really bad things that could happen, like my TV catching fire, should be someone else's problem. It should be UL certified. But I'm not shopping for UL certified.
You've touched on in one
You know
sentence
there's a
the two
software
things.
UL certification?
Hold on.
Hold on. Say it again.
You know there's a UL certification for software?
no.
Did not.
I
know
don't. Well, Mudge was working on
Look up UL 6900.
UL 69.
So, but what
Like,
what the UL has is they are an authority having jurisdiction. They're responsible for enforcing the requirements of a STOD or standard or having equipment, materials, or procedure. UL is not the only underwriter out there. There are others, but they're the big one. And so they got the force of law behind them. There isn't that with these stickers yet, and that's the problem. You don't have that. And then, by the way, a store's not going to sell non-UL stuff without some risk.
right. Well,
Right,
but
right.
that's a great point, Lee. Yeah, you got to
Yeah.
get into the
We assume that every product that's available for sale on the
Is
shelf
UL certified,
is UL
yeah.
certified.
Yeah.
It's become ubiquitous.
Oh, how do we get there for security though? How do we make sure that every place you can go buy a device
Right.
meets some minimum security standard, much like it meets some.
We're
UL
not there
standard?
yet.
Yeah.
Maybe
I would
this is a
argue
step.
that this is the
Yeah.
Poison Club. Do you remember? Does anybody here ever heard of the Poison Club?
Wait, is that like a Tylenol cyanide reference?
No. There was a group of people in the early 1900s who, because food manufacturers were putting everything from strychnine to dyes to everything in food, they would get together and eat meals that were laced with what they found, substances that they found in commercial food. And as they got sick, because they were literally poisoning themselves, they would take note of the symptoms. And then when they saw those symptoms in the wild, per se, in groups of people, they're like, all right, that's probably what's in the food. Let's go find the food that could be in.
And
Seriously,
is
not a
that
joke.
is that how the FDA became into?
That's
Yeah,
exactly
it. Right? It has to be.
But I wanted to touch
That's where
on
the
Paul.
FDA came from.
You said you encapsulated what I think are the two prevailing attitudes out there in the private sector anyway, and probably in the government as well. The idea that security is somebody else's problem. I don't have to worry about it, and whatever it is that I'm using must be secure. Otherwise, my company wouldn't have purchased it for me to use. But in theory, there's somebody in the company that's doing smart shopping and smart procurement of the things, and maybe they would benefit from some kind of label like this. I think this is a starting point. I don't think this is the be-all, end-all.
Mm-hmm.
But for those that are charged with looking, that probably don't know what to look for anyway, this is a start.
But I think the big difference between the food analogies that we're making and the technology aspect of it is technology can change. Food, once it's delivered, to Josh's point, either has poison or it doesn't. When it lands in the store, it is the end product. When I buy a piece of technology, that has to be updated, that can be changed, that can pull data from different. So we look at there's a
Not necessarily.
Well, no,
not
there's
necessarily. Remember the VAX and the silver mine. It doesn't interface with anything else. It's fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
but there are exceptions to that. But most of the products today have some dynamic update element.
Agreed.
My story number, the Netgear 17, Netgear Nighthawk has an AWS JSON authenticated double stack overflow vulnerability. I love the double stack. I'm not sure what they were referring to in the double stack
It's
overflow.
two stacks in one.
Two stacks. So, but basically, you have to. But in any case, this router would have to be updated to remediate this vulnerability. That doesn't translate to the food analogy that we're making.
Sure, it does. Your food expires and your cyber safety rating expires.
Yeah, but I'm not going to eat expired food.
That's a good
But even there, there's best if used by and not to be sold after. I mean, there's different measurements for that in the food industry.
But there's a finite amount of time, Sam, where I'm going to consume and or use the food.
And the same is true here. You can say if something was certified a year ago, you probably don't trust that it's certified anymore.
But I can still use it. My Netgear Nighthawk R7000 router is still going to work and still going to route packets.
Yeah,
still
but
going to do
it's
Wi-Fi. I'm not going
increasing.
to necessarily get sick.
But that's
if I
the thing.
expired meat,
risk
if I expired
is
meat, I'm getting
increasing.
sick.
Yeah, but if you look at canned food or a bottle of aspirin, it has an expiration date, and you can use it far beyond that. It's similar.
Yeah, but that's not.
No, it's not. It's not.
Meat
And
is
some of them become less effective. Some of them become more and more dangerous, or the risk raises. Yes,
That's right. It becomes more dangerous. The possibility is some water might have leaked in there and it might have decayed, but it might not have. And it's the same thing with your router.
When's the last time you get diarrhea from your router?
Well, how would I know?
Dysentery.
It's all depend on
My
where you're browsing.
father-in-law.
Everything could be coming
My
from my
father-in-law was in World War II. He was
Dysentery?
airborne, and he was somewhere in France, and his unit came across a stockpile of canned food that had been stored since World War I.
Mm-hmm.
Most people would say it's probably long expired, but if the can wasn't puffed up, they opened it and ate it. He's like, it was the best meal we'd had in weeks.
Interesting.
There are people out there on YouTube that actually buy like World War II and potentially even earlier
I love
rations,
watching those.
and they
I
open them and
No.
eat them.
But I have a different story from World War II
With these
in
cookies, the
dysentery.
pemmikins and stuff. Oh, it's hilarious.
It's hilarious.
And then there's a guy who bought the 20-year-old bottle of Crystal Pepsi and drank the whole thing. And about 30 minutes later, the video is of him puking uncontrollably into the toilet for, like an hour or two.
I think sometimes we really, I relate myself to our ancestors. My grandfather, quick story, he was going over the seas in World War II, got on the boat, and the crew members were all getting sick with dysentery.
Mm-hmm.
And the captain of the ship took everyone aside and was like, I need a volunteer or a couple to take over the kitchen. So they were all not getting sick. And my grandfather volunteered. He's like, I inherit a lot of my personality, I think, from my grandfather. My grandfather's like, look, I'll do it, but I got to pick 2 other people on this ship to help me. And you have to assign those 2 people to me, and they do whatever I say. The captain's like, all right, you got it. My grandfather chose 2 people, and he said, the first thing you're going to do, we're all going to go in the kitchen. We're going to get this bleach. We're going to mix it with some water. And we're going to scrub everything down from top to bottom. My grandfather's, despite my last name, I'm mostly Italian. My grandfather's Italian, so he knew all about cooking. Mm-hmm. He's like, all right, scrub everything down, bleach top to bottom, and then we're going to cook, and we're going to cook pasta. and we're going to have this cheese and meat. We're going to put that out for everyone. And after my grandfather took over the kitchen, no one got sick. It was a great story from my family of like.
So what's the tie back to IoT? What's the analogy?
He read the labels on all the food.
Absolutely none.
Had nothing
He just
to do
wanted
with the
brag about his
food.
grandpa.
It was
It was the process.
It was the process.
Security
and
is
the
a process.
implementation.
It was a process and implementation. Absolutely.
You wanted to
Absolutely.
brag about your grandpa. Come on.
I will never forget that story. Speaking of stories, where do we want to go next?
I loved your story number 9, Paul. Just
My
because,
story number 9.
Because
Oh, you would. Yes.
Yep.
Yes. This was
This
so
is fascinating.
you got to make sure you click into this article and look at the initial, like the first image in this article is, after you read the article, you realize what it is, right? But the Russian missile engineers, I guess you would call them.
the engineers for the Russian cruise missile program, yeah.
Correct. And they are all standing, smiling for this picture in front of what looks like a very Russian style building. It has very specific columns, steps, glass entrance. You can even see in the picture in the upper left-hand corner the roofing architecture that exists on the front of the building. Now, I think most people, or I guess I should say people that aren't of like our hacker mindset, and I think there's a lot of you out there that have that hacker mindset that might not know it, and this is a great exercise to go through. In my comments in this article were me and my hacker mindset, and most of us here today and listening would look at this picture and go, all right, how do I figure out what that building is? Like, what are the aspects of this picture and artifacts I can look at to figure out who the people are, where this building is, what building is this, what architecture, what are the things in the picture that weren't intended by the person who took the picture or the people in the picture that they wanted to have lead. And I do this all the time. Every time I see a picture, not every time, most of the time. We can't turn this off in our brains. We look at a picture. Tyler, I know you've talked about doing this in investigations. You look at a picture on social media or wherever it is.
You don't look at the foreground.
I'm not looking at what the intention of the picture. This is the essence of hacking. The unintended features. I'm looking at what wasn't intended in
What's
this
in the
picture.
background?
What's in the background?
What's in the foreground?
What's laying on the floor behind there? What's on the wall? What are the things that person did not intend for me to observe in this picture that I can observe and draw conclusions from? This is like so much the hacker mindset. And they did this in this picture and figured out exactly what building this was and determined that that's the place that the missile program stemmed from.
And this was actually an example of Lee's story number 5, which is 8 strange ways employees can accidentally expose data.
Yes.
And one of those elements
too.
is stuff that's in the picture. You're on a Zoom call, you're doing lots of video conferencing and stuff like that.
Stop wearing your news badge while being interviewed by television.
I always pay attention. Like, what's in my background? We all do this too. What's in my background when I go on a Zoom call or take a picture before I post I posted one on social media about the guy in the truck that delivered my packages today. And when I took the picture, it was like the reverse. I said to myself, what is in this picture that could be used against me that might be unintended, making sure there was none of those artifacts in that picture. I don't want my house number on there. I don't want my license plate. To protect that person's privacy, the privacy of my neighbors across the street, I don't want their license plates in this picture. When I snapped the picture in before I put it on social media, I made sure, to the best of my ability, there was no unintended data leaks inside of that picture.
My favorite story about stuff in pictures and things in the background you don't think about was back when I was at NSA, the first office that I was in. The secretary, I was in.
Oh, is this when she went on her honeymoon?
Yeah, I've told this story
told
before.
The story. Yeah.
In case you haven't heard it before.
No, but it is relevant to the story too.
There's a secretary that got married, went on her honeymoon, and she came back and she had pictures of her honeymoon, and they'd gone to the Poconos, and so they were in one.
That was the place back in the day.
It was the place. This is back in the 80s. And they had pictures where each of them were in the heart-shaped tub that's filled with bubbles and everything. And I'm looking at these pictures, and I'm like, the bathtub is lined with mirrors, and I'm looking in the background in the mirror. I'm like, yeah, there's people there. I said, I won't, Julie. I'm not going to say the person's real name. Were you guys both in the tub, and so you were probably naked, and you took turns jumping out to take pictures of one another? She goes, yeah. Why? I said, look behind you. There's mirrors there. She's like, oh my God! And she grabbed all the pictures and snatched them up because they were there in their full glory.
Yeah. This is, from a corporate standpoint, this is one of the areas that attackers use, physical access people use. We'd use this, like we look for YouTube videos of your media presentation, your walkthrough of your new facility. We look for badges as your PR people are publishing the latest interview on an HVAC system. We look for your vendors and your vendors' pictures of the cool new job they just did for the contracting as you're developing it, so I can see what's underneath the ground or within inside of the building structure. Like all those things are unintended
building permits are
consequences
public.
Of history.
I love it, like the details matter. I'll look at pictures and go, because I'm a headphone nerd. I'll look when my kids are watching YouTube, or there's a picture and someone has headphones on, or there's headphones in the background. I'll go, that's that model headphone, and so now I know how much of a headphone audiophile nerd you are based on what you're wearing and what's in the background. I can spot that model headphone, and you can do that with anything that's in the background of a picture, and derive details that weren't intended in that original video or
back in the early days. And I don't, I'm sure there's equivalents these days, but bug track was a big thing. There was also something called the firewall mailing list. But people would put stuff out there, say, hey, I've just bought this, XYZ firewall, and I'm having trouble configuring it.
Same thing.
And
here's my rule set.
And here's their work address, and so
ADD. But along those lines, G. Mark Hardy in, what does he call his podcast? CISO Tradecraft? Is that his podcast? G. Mark Hardy does a CISO something. I think it's CISO Tradecraft is the name, and I apologize, G. Mark, for that. But he interviewed Bill Cheswick. Great interview. We've interviewed Cheswick as well.
Yep.
I have to say, especially if you're just getting into the field of cybersecurity, if you have an opportunity to go back and dig in our archives and go find the Cheswick interview and go listen to the G. Mark, it's amazing. You definitely want to listen to Bill talk about that stuff for sure.
Go ahead,
Mandy.
Go ahead, Mandy.
Let's see, on the photos, it brings up a lot of other things because obviously, yes, this for security, this is a huge, huge deal with Ukraine, Russia. However, it kind of shocks me how many times people do not pay attention at all and or send information and don't even scrub the EXIF data from the photo itself.
Ask me how I know this.
I know it.
But also, man, to your point too, I think a lot of those ones are fake too. We see the very personal devices in the female that took the picture and and I think a lot of those are fake. But there's also a lot of them that are real, that are actually leaking information about themselves in these pictures.
I've probably told this story too, but I had a client some years ago where their CIO happened. This is a company that had suffered a major breach. Their CIO was running for public office, and he had a website set up, and part of his bio was, I'm the CIO for this company, and we run this technology, this technology, this technology, this technology. And he was going through firewalls, routers, we're a Cisco shop. We have, Oracle databases. We have this, that, and the other. It was like down to version number. And I'm like, wow, this is gold.
Gold. But I also advise my family too, when they're posting on social media, and I look at all the images they're posting on social media, there are oftentimes, and I'm sure I'm definitely not the only one that's done this. You need to take that one down. That you snapped a picture, and in the background was some kind of PII in some
right.
The picture with someone's birthday in it, something that leaks some kind of thing. And we all do this. All of us in cybersecurity coach our respective friends and family on what they post online, specific to pictures. Realize what's in that picture before you put it on social media.
Right.
Before you put information, whether it's in your description, Jeff, whether it's a post about something, you can't put too much information out there.
That should just be general consensus. Like, that needs to be education. I think our kids are actually more aware than maybe parents and grandparents and stuff, because things like family calendars with where all the kids are going to be throughout the entire month at any given time.
That's
like,
in the background too.
That stuff terrifies.
Yeah.
Or diplomas, or I mean, from a safety perspective, I used to get on when my kids were teenagers and they were posting pictures on MySpace and later Facebook, and people had on sweatshirts that were saying what school they went to and if they had an ID badge or something. Very often, I mean, we had to take our badges off at NSA if we were going to get in a picture. Badges had to go.
So do we.
And
badges
anything
are
that
another
anything
thing,
that was
yeah.
on the wall, if there was going to be some kind of ceremony or something, and there would be pictures, everything came off the wall. Which was very often diplomas, or sometimes it was a security awareness poster. But it could be anything. I mean, there's so much information that can be derived from things that you don't think about, and it's not just the reflections. It's anything that's got information that can help identify location, who you are, where you are, where you work.
Yep, and like also the same pictures from others. Like this particular article, they had a general idea as to where the offices might be, but they weren't positive. So looking at satellite imagery, they tried to find some spots that matched, but then they found some other geotagged pictures or on the Russian social network VK. And what they had found was that a professional roofer was on top of one building nearby and had taken a picture of like what the clouds looked like from his position, and in it had a very high resolution photo of
that
a portion
building.
of that. So it's not what you give up; it's what other people's give up.
But
too.
that's an interesting supply chain analogy. Is that you may not be? We've talked up to this point much of what we can control in ourselves and enforce on our family members. But now you've got a contractor working on a roof, and it's not even your roof that contractor's working on that's taking a picture that's leaking information that can lead back to you, which I think leads into, Josh, I had a supply chain story in here, my story number 6. You good, Josh? I know you got a lot of kid stuff going on.
No, I'm good. I got the kids back in the carriages and everything is good. I just Janice was a little overwhelmed.
No
I said,
worries.
let me give you a hand.
So my story number 6, all-day DevOps, a third of Log4j downloads still pull vulnerable versions despite threat of supply chain attacks. And that's just one.
Okay.
But that's just one
here's
data
the deal.
point.
How many scripts have an old version hard-coded?
Or cached in. So one of the things they talk about too, to that point, is, and I think there was 4 great points in there. I mean, we could talk about this article, I think, for some time in the context of supply chain and software security. But there's also the build systems that cache different versions. And we've talked about this. I don't think Sam's here, but Sam and I have talked about this in that you tune your build system that I always pull this version of the library. And I don't often go back and update that to pull the latest version, because if I pull the latest version, that could change things that mean I have to change things in my code. And one of the recommendations here is that you should update your build systems to make sure they're not caching or pulling older versions of the library, which is how I think we get to a third of the Log4j downloads are still pulling the older versions. One of my evil grin scenarios is, what if Log4j and other projects were to not allow people to pull down the vulnerable versions of the library? Now that would break a lot of code, obviously.
That's
really bad.
effectively like doing seizing a domain, like the customs people do, CBP people do. You
Sure.
could seize or lock off the old version, and then anything that was hard coded would just come up with the equivalent of a 404, right?
And I think also too, in this article, they did research that proves the scope of this problem. And there's 2 different aspects of that. There are known attacks against open source repositories increasing by 633%. But the other statistic that's really frightening is that more people are using open source libraries. So between 2015 and 2022, there have been trillions of download requests across various package managers, soaring that like 3,000% increase in JavaScript or Java downloads. So, like, those are combined very frightening. That means the attackers are going after supply chain attacks against open source software, and more people are reliant on open source software in huge orders of magnitude, which was really kind of staggering to me. And it's really scary. It's really scary.
But the flip side is we get people jacking up code repositories, and they're putting new versions out there that are not what you wanted. So you got to be careful moving forward on your version to get one that's genuine.
Yeah, Paul, and you know your PyPy story, and we've talked about that recently. Didn't you? And one that also makes me think of it that I didn't get a chance to read. Didn't you have a story in here somewhere on some securing of CI/CD pipelines, or was that something different?
Yeah. So what's interesting, and it's a great point, Larry, in the context of this, I think that whatever that story was that I talked about, now I'm losing numbers. The problem is exacerbated.
Do you smell burnt toast?
Attackers are going after open source libraries. We're using more of open source libraries. That's a bad combination. What do we do about it? And there were two tools that I identified that can help you with this problem. So Harden, my story number 30, Harden Runner, is a GitHub action that installs a security agent on the GitHub hosted runner to prevent exfiltration of credentials, detect tampering of source code during build, and detect compromised dependencies in build tools. What struck me about this is they were very hyper aware of this and Guard Dog. Where was my Guard Dog story?
29.
29.
Right above it.
29 is the Guard Dog story, right? That talks about static analysis tools are typically used to identify vulnerabilities. This is not identifying vulnerabilities. This is identifying someone who has an attacker who has tampered with a library that's in the supply chain. And you have to look at it in a slightly different lens. So here are two tools that are open source, available for anyone to download, that can help you with this problem of identifying issues in my software supply chain. So I think it's all these stories relate, right?
Yep.
The problem is exacerbated, but there are tools that are available to help you identify and prevent this problem. Because one of the things that both of these projects look at is, and it's something I've always said, let's say I have a Python project and I pull in a Python library. Why does that code in that Python library need to connect out to the internet? Like, hold on, let's back up a second. I'm designing the application. I should be dealing with all of the connections to said application. If I'm pulling in a library, I think the large majority of the time that library is providing some functionality to my application that does not require that library code to reach out to the internet and send data out to the internet. And if I look for just that one condition, I'm in much better shape in preventing against some of these supply chain attacks. Turns out both of these projects talk about that aspect of let's scrutinize and analyze our source code we're pulling into our repositories, but it shouldn't do malicious things.
On a similar, real quick, Jeff, on a
Stop messing
similar
with my
one,
C2, Paul.
on a similar one, my story number 1, SLSA dip or salsa dip, talks about some of those similar types of things about, here's all the possible places where things could go wrong using repositories and CI/CD pipeline and all that stuff. So some interesting tangential sort
several
of
questions. Who, anybody can respond to this. Who in an organization should be looking for this stuff? What's the motivation to be looking for this stuff? I think of the companies that I work with that largely only respond to Patch Tuesday and scan results, and they don't do much more than that. Who's responsible for this? Who should be responsible for this in any given organization?
I think we make sure we delineate between third-party software and I'm writing my own software.
Okay.
I think are two different things
Yep.
that in the supply chain, it's difficult to navigate these waters and have started to draw some of these lines. I'm writing my own software.
Yeah, and then that would be the tack that I would take with this. That I'm
Yeah.
writing my own software. That
So let's talk about the I'm writing
So
my
I have
own.
lots of companies that have development groups that are writing their own software.
Writing my own software, you have to. It's interesting how we kind of go back to antivirus, like endpoint style things. Are we looking at signatures or are we looking at behavior? If you're writing your own software, the projects that I mentioned and the problem we're tackling is I have to look at the behavior of the software that I'm pulling in that I'm not writing that is incorporated with the software that I'm writing.
You're saying you have to, but what's the motivation
to.
for most developers to do that?
There has to be someone with that responsibility, whether it's
Do they have the
QA
experience to know security issues?
Yeah,
as a developer?
it's a great question, Tyler. Right? Like, is it a QA function? Is it a more mature organizations? It's a site reliability engineer, someone who's helping putting all that together and running it on the platform. There needs to be a responsibility.
centers.
It's a cost center, but I think it's a very important cost center that someone needs to have, or a group needs to have the responsibility of validating, verifying whether or not you can trust the software that we're pulling in, and looking for behaviors that are indicative of whether or not we should trust that software coming in, because it could compromise the integrity of our software.
Is that group part of security, part of the dev team?
My Jesse Michael answer is it depends.
It depends.
Okay,
depends.
let's address this for a second, because this is a valid point.
Maybe multiple. Go ahead, Josh.
And Larry, you're absolutely correct. It may be multiple people, but who's
Sure.
going to pay for those people? Which of the development groups is going to use them and actually listen to them and actually follow their directions, if any? Who's responsible? Jeff, I think you were. Who do they report to? This is a significant reorganization and shift. This is I think honestly, it's as significant as when
I'm
DevOps came.
I'm going to go to my board and I'm going to tell them, look, we should allow all of our users to trust and download any software they want and run it. Most boards today are going to be like, you're off your rocker. So then when I translate that to developers, I'm going to say, well, so you wouldn't allow your developers to incorporate any software and download it and install it and run it and incorporate it without some level of verification. The same level of verification as to the integrity of that software, the behavior of that software needs to be evaluated, whether it's an end user or whether it's incorporated in our development process. It's the same. It's the same problem.
I agree, except what have we been telling developers for, 50 years? Get the code out the door. Now, have we been telling them, and I've been saying this for 20, 30 years, I promise you, have we been telling them, get secure code out the door? And in the same realm that 30 years ago, they were writing every line of that code, now they're Legoing it together. I keep using that term, forgive me.
It's a
and Lego
great
don't sue
analogy.
me.
It's a great, hold on, Lee has a comment.
So I was going to say, get it out the door and as few defects as possible. And they're not talking security; they're talking function.
Right.
Yeah.
Get it out the door, make it work, make our customers happy with the features and benefits that we have brought to them with this latest version, and let me sell the next thing that's 6 months down the line.
But this
Okay.
is
Yes.
but there needs to be a line item for the cost of incorporating other people's software.
I agree.
Right?
But
Like
we said
there's
this
a
earlier.
cost to that. Like there's a way we didn't have to write that code, so we've had some savings, but it's not a huge savings as you think. You still need to verify and validate the trust in that software, and there's a cost, and it's much less than writing that software yourself. Right.
How do we force a company, an enterprise, an agency, a contractor, an organization to actually make those things happen when, in reality, wait for a minute, this is an interesting one, security is not in the shareholders' best interests of the company. And therefore, it is illegal for companies to actually do this. Because if it's not in the best interest of the shareholders, it is against the morals and ethics of a publicly traded company. So how do we force them to do it?
Well, and
Okay.
it costs money, so it's not in the best interest of shareholders.
Right. That's what Jeff. You get what I'm saying?
I'm gonna give you a sneak preview into my blog post that hopefully will be posted this week. If you inherently trust the software supply chain, the bad things don't happen until it's too late.
Yeah.
I think there's no better analogy than Order 66 in Star Wars. Anyone remember Order 66?
Execute Order
Which movie?
66.
Order 66.
Not that it's going to help me.
Turn
the droids on the
Revenge of the Nerds?
Attack of the Clones into Revenge of the Sith. Think about this. The Jedi Order fighting alongside the clone troopers. They inherently trust the clone troopers. They're on their side. They're helping us fight the war until that back door that was implanted as a chip inside of all the clone troopers, unbeknownst to the Jedi Order, is activated. Once that is activated, the clone troopers are then pre-programmed to treat all Jedi as traitors to the Republic and should be executed on sight.
Jedi go to the Kaminoans to build this army.
Right.
And their army gets backdoored.
Their army's great. This army is great. We've got this army. They're fighting alongside us for all this time. We develop a rapport with them. We're all fighting a battle together. They're helping us win all of these battles until such time that backdoor is activated. That supply chain attack is executed in Order 66. The Jedi, valiant warriors in the Star Wars canon, are taken back by this. And they don't realize that there is an attack until it happens because they weren't proactively looking for that particular back door. I think, Josh, to your point, that's where we need to be in the enterprise, is proactively looking for these before they become Order 66.
Hopefully that doesn't apply to Apple iPhones and or Google Android at some point, and this is China and NATO's long-term strategy.
Larry, I referenced your hardware backdoor. The hardware backdoor that you talked about, where someone implemented a hardware backdoor in, I think it was Cisco devices, where the chip was implanted.
Monte Elkins did that on the chip.
I referenced. I mean, that was like that research was the physical implementation of Order 66 because it was a physical chip put inside of all the clone troopers.
Even better. Remember, Jeff, National Cryptologic Museum, the Great Seal.
Mm-hmm.
The Russians handed a beautiful wooden Great Seal to I think it was the American Embassy in Moscow,
I believe,
and implanted in it was a resonant transmitter.
Yep.
Or the typewriter.
Okay.
We talked about the typewriter.
Well, there's been many of those types of things, which are now in the museum, which were secret when I learned about it.
Right.
But you can go see them at the museum,
we need to
which is now open again.
Yeah, we need to go to the
You can read
museum.
books about them. I did that not that long ago. I forget which book it was, but that stuff was in there.
So the problem still is, I'm gonna harp on this, and I'm sorry. It's something I've been reading and writing, and oh my God, it's fascinating and it's terrifying all at the same time. Is that the problem is that we need something that forces an enterprise to go against the best interests of the shareholders, i.e. profit at any cost, in order to forward the goals and values of society as a whole, i.e. don't let Order 66 be executed.
Yeah, it's verify then trust. But you're right, Josh, the verify part of it eats into the profit. Excuse me, there's a cost to that verification process.
Well, and you jump to the enterprise, but that's only that many companies based on how many are out there.
Right.
Most people are only going to jump and respond to when something's happened.
Now, also, I'm going to give some more spoilers for my blog post. Since you guys like the first analogy, I'm going to go to the other.
Just no Andor spoilers.
No Andor. This is going to go. So I had three. Order 66 was the first one. The second one was the thermal exhaust port.
Yeah.
Those was
design flaw.
It's classic.
Right. We watched Star Wars: A New Hope, and we were like, "Oh, there was a flaw. Like that was like the Empire messed up. There was a flaw." It wasn't until Rogue One was released we realized that flaw wasn't an accident. That flaw was put there by Galen Erso. And where I struggle to draw finite analogies into security is, where has there been a time where an attacker has purposely introduced a vulnerability? That's what Galen did. He purposely introduced a vulnerability, then disclosed that vulnerability to the rebels so that they could exploit that flaw. Where in software or somewhere in security have we actually purposely introduced not a backdoor,
Wise
right? Order
cameras.
66 at the back door. Where have we introduced a vulnerability? I feel like we've talked about it on a show somewhere. Somewhere in our 17 years of doing weekly shows,
we've probably talked about it more than once.
We've probably talked about it more than once. But I kind of struggled with it also. So rather than trying to figure out where it's happened in the past, I was like, let's look at if this happened. It would be advantageous, I believe, for the attackers to go, I want to introduce a vulnerability. Because as we've seen, in my example was like the pseudo vulnerability in open source, that vulnerability persisted for 10, 15 years and no one noticed. So if I'm an attacker, I gain access, I introduce a vulnerability, like chances are people aren't going to see it until I exploit it, in which case you kind of burn your exploit, but like make sure it counts when you burn your exploit and go, I'm going to now exploit the vulnerability that I purposely introduced into the supply chain. Please contact me if you've got great examples on this, because I've kind of struggled. Mandy.
Maybe in a side way, I'm not sure, because if you go, something in that idea is what drove some of my research this week into the undersea cables, the fiber optic cables that connect different continents and different countries for internet transfer. And if you go to the article about undersea cable wars competition, the control of networks brings long-term security risks to the surface. There, it's discussing that exactly about how the fiber optic cables, even the security risks of having them manufactured and being manufactured with backdoors, to where they're compromising the integrity of the data that's getting to a different country, or that is now they're in there for the long term. You don't know when and how or where they will be activated. It's a really fascinating part, and I think it goes along with what you're saying. I mean,
no,
this
absolutely.
is kind of
I would look at that as more of the order 66 category versus the like I had what if I introduced log4j on purpose? What if I got in the supply chain and I introduced that vulnerability on purpose? I didn't put a backdoor that we talked about, a couple of open source projects, right, that could detect those backdoors, but I introduced a vulnerability on purpose. I kind of struggled. I thought about maybe the Ken Thompson paper. That's still more of a backdoor, not necessarily a vulnerability. The compiler that compiles the compiler that gets into login.c.
Oh my God, again?
But it's
again?
still, but I thought of that in the context, Josh, of that's still a backdoor. That's not introducing a vulnerability. Introducing a vulnerability would be in the compiler that compiles the compiler, I put a buffer overflow so that login.c has a buffer overflow, as an example.
So there's an old article, it's 2020, it's not that old, from ZDNet, that almost 1 in 5, GitHub did start, that was when GitHub really started doing scans of all of their corpus of code.
That. Yeah.
And they said that 1 in 5 bugs are planted for malicious purposes.
Interesting. So there's got to be examples out there. But to me, that's the Galen Russell vulnerability. Yep. It's in that case, it was a malicious insider, right? It could be an external attacker that has gained access. So there's two different scenarios. Malicious attacker gains access, introduces a vulnerability, or a malicious insider introduces a vulnerability on purpose, versus the many examples that we have, log4j, OpenSSL.
So there's probably some percentage of vulnerabilities that are discovered that were planted, and we don't know what percentage it is.
And how do you prove that, Jeff? Now that you articulate that,
how do you know? And especially with the so much reliance on open source now.
And I think wait, Tyler had a comment. Oh.
No, I was just gonna say, like, planted or not patched on purpose. Look at something like Eternal Blue, where the ongoing operations, NSA or other actors were leveraging this for, was reliant on, like, there were discussions, I'm sure, on whether to patch or not patch. Like, this is an ongoing thing with 0 days and nation states. So
and that's still
look at SS7 network.
Yeah, but that's a great. It's a dotted line, Tyler. It's a great point. I didn't necessarily. I didn't introduce the vulnerability, but I found the vulnerability. But I'm not going to tell anyone about it.
Josh has got it.
Josh.
I saw the light bulb.
I don't know how many years ago it was.
That's
but
just
do you
a
remember
glare
when
off his head.
Cisco?
Look at the face. Look at the face. I love the job.
Do you remember when Cisco was intercepting shipments and putting backdoor and bug
Yes.
code into Cisco stuff?
Wait,
Sorry,
you
the
mean-
NSA was intercepting Cisco
Yes.
shipments.
Yes.
Would that count?
I referenced
more
the
like a
super.
backdoor
So
I referenced Supermicro. Supermicro had a hardware. It's the hardware stuff. I still go back to Order 66. Yeah,
And I-
Larry was with me on that.
And I think the key part that you've got here, Paul, is that when you said, great, the whole scenario about putting the backdoor in or whether it's not to patch, it's how do you know? It's like that measurement, and that's the providing it to someone else to exploit. And I think that's the key to the knowing here. And I think that's probably the tougher part, like trying to dig up one of those stories.
Right.
Like,
It's hard. It's hard to like think about. We've covered countless vulnerabilities on the show. How would you purposely introduce a vulnerability? That's an art and a science like rolled into one.
Again,
Like, how do I
go read Salsa Dip, the Salsa Dip one. That's your roadmap on how to deliver vulnerability.
I did start reading that. That was a good one.
There's I've been finding stuff from unusual news sources.
I saw. You know
this
what's
day.
interesting, Larry? In the Salsa Dip one of my stories, I don't remember which one, has this graph: developer, source, build, package, dependencies.
Yep.
This graph looks familiar in that I saw it in an article that I also covered
It's from
this week.
Salsa version 0.1 specification, so it's one of those things that's out there type of thing.
It's something that I still have to read and study for sure.
Dude, between you and me and new jobs, whole new worlds. It's a whole new world.
Hey, well, speaking of NSA, you had an NSA posting. Or
I did.
Something.
I did. I thought it was interesting that the NSA released a cybersecurity information sheet. I'm not sure if this is a regular thing from the NSA. All good, by the way, in my opinion. Software memory safety. This begs so much debate. I'm glad you identified this one, Jeff, because the NSA, and I had to read through this paper. Like
NSA.
NSA. I wanted to like pull from this paper like what they were really getting at, and what they were getting at is non-memory safe languages
C
versus memory safe languages.
Python,
like Rust.
Okay, Rust. Sure.
We could draw multiple examples of each, right? So let's talk about this quote.
Right.
So they say, while the use of added protections to non-memory safe languages and the use of memory safe languages do not provide absolute protection against exploitable memory issues, they do provide considerable protection. Like, wow. I didn't think about that for like an hour before I have some. Anyway, they go on to say, therefore, the overarching software community across the private sector, academia, and the U.S. government have begun initiatives to drive the culture of software development towards utilizing memory-safe languages. The NSA was very...
NSA.
Did I say NSA?
You said the NSA.
You did.
NSA was bullish on the concept of memory-safe languages are better than non-memory safe languages coupled with protections. And I thought that was really interesting. I thought that
why?
NSA taking that stance was indicative of the problem that we're facing today. That was, we tend to say, I still need to use C, and therefore I can compensate for its memory unsafety with these compensating controls, and it's just like,
No, you should use Rust
and it's
instead.
just like, not really. Like, you need to really use a memory safe language, otherwise there's going to be this unprotected attack surface. And that was the gist of their paper. And I thought it was really prolific for them to put a stake in the ground and go, no, you need to use a memory safe language.
These got to
I don't know if I necessarily disagree. Lee.
So I don't disagree that we need to use memory safe languages, but we still have to use
Code analysis, dynamic and static,
to make sure we're not doing the wrong thing. I've written apps that didn't do memory right, and even in a memory safe language, you're still going to get in trouble. I mean, if you want to do C sharp. It's memory safe. Or Go, Java, Ruby, Rust. But most importantly, couple it with good development practices too. It's not just one, it's both.
But also, Lee, I'm going to add on to your point and talk about performance. I think one of the reasons why we use memory unsafe languages, challenge me on this, the driver for that is performance. With modern compute, look, 20 years ago, okay, like I'd probably give it to you. I would give it to you 20 years ago or more. Mm-hmm. In today's modern computing architecture, that performance argument has waned to the point of the performance benefits that you gain. There might be some still fringe use cases, but I think the performance benefits that you gain are minuscule. In that you can program in memory safe languages and still have negligible impact on performance.
Okay.
No? Maybe? I don't know.
Can I disagree?
Mm-hmm. Yes, please do.
Okay, so first off, does anybody hosting or viewing currently on Discord this program use dial-up for their primary internet service provision?
Primary?
I know somebody that does,
like a modem.
Nobody on this program.
Yeah, like a modem. Because do you know how many Americans still do?
Quite
a lot.
Quite a few.
Quite a bit.
Lots.
None?
You're
No, a lot.
millions of Americans use dial-up as their primary internet. Millions, many millions, as a matter of fact. AOL
Coming
had
from the middle of
22 million
nowhere,
subscribers.
Idaho, like how is that possible?
Because there's a lot of places that are even more middle of nowhere than you. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, but that's
So-
Tyler's going to go find one of those places now.
I know a guy, former member of the pit, lives in a Midwestern state, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. He still relies on DSL, and he does forensics. So he'll take days to download.
Is he like
files that he has to analyze.
10th or 11th gen Intel? That's my point. Like, Josh, I get your internet speed thing is one thing, but the CPU processing power on your computer is another thing.
Right.
And so, okay, I'm 12th gen on my laptop because I'm a nerd. But you go back even a few generations before that. How much does that performance impact really matter when we're talking about memory safe versus non-memory safe languages? That's
You're
not really.
100% correct.
Someone could do a study on that.
You're 100% correct if you're talking about your local laptop and things running only and totally on your local laptop, processing, managing, handling, dealing with. But if you add in the totality of most applications where they're reaching out to the internet, or libraries where they're reaching out to the internet, and where they're going.
I see what you did there.
In that case, Josh, the limitation is not the language. The limitation is the fabric and the infrastructure and that stuff,
right.
not the language itself.
Dude. Okay, you're talking about certain industries. I mean, look, there are industries that don't run. Look at the old slogan, "Hack naked." Why? Because that's what people do. And in reality, high-frequency traders run naked because anything that adds a nanosecond of slack is millions of dollars a minute.
Yep.
So there are entire industries that every little tiny fragment of performance is infinitely important. Now, that's a tiny piece. I get it. You're right. Okay? But the point is that there are so many populations of differences that if your application is run by one of those communities that needs every iota of performance, it's going to be run as fast as it can be, irrespective of anything else. And if you're competing against a company that's writing in memory safe and you can say that we're 20% faster, guess what? You'll make more sales.
I don't know. Integrity and performance definitely have a relationship, Josh, and I think that gap is slowly closing.
Right.
Oh, that's cool.
So
I like that, and that's valid. I agree with you.
I keep flashing back to when we used to sit there and get every bit of performance out. Sorry, Josh.
No, you're right. Please do it.
No, Lee, 486, right? Like you need to squeeze every minuscule of performance.
You press the
out of
turbo
that.
button. Jeez.
Yeah, absolutely.
Trash 80s.
So I think Jeff knows I was thinking a lot older than that.
Yep.
But
When you had
but
4K of memory.
yeah, and Jesse talked about this I think in the context of this article, right? Like when we went from assembly to C, we saw that paradigm shift. That
Drink.
yes, assembly, more performant.
Yep. No, I was saying drinking about paradigm shift. You need to be a manager to use that.
God, I know. I'm sorry. I apologize for using that.
Manager, director, or C-level executive.
Can we synergize these figures in a paradigm shifted environment?
But let's all
I
get
need 7
hold
lines.
On. Let's all get on the same page now. Assembly. Assembly.
Tyler's groaning to himself.
He is. But assembly super fast, but very error prone. And we went to C. We got less error prone, trying to preserve as much performance as possible. I think we see the same, if we're on the same page, another paradigm shift to more memory safe languages that are almost equally as performant, that we're seeing this progression that allows us to be almost as performant as the previous generation with more security. And that's the shit we
But then
assembly to C to more to Rust and
But you're back to the cost. You know,
of rewrite. The
they
cost
got to
of rewriting.
rewrite everything.
Yeah, agreed.
And
There's a cost
it's already
there. Yeah.
working, and we haven't had any problems yet.
How many tens of millions of lines of code do we have? Let's just say in the Linux kernel alone that we need to migrate from. We went from assembly to C. Now we need to C to the next thing, Rust or whatever it is, to be more secure.
So sure, use it moving forward, but you're going to have this legacy issue for a long time.
Long time.
Long time.
Agreed.
Okay, so then how do we take that legacy issue? And I know I'm harping on this, and I apologize. But how do we take that legacy issue and move to a place where we don't have it anymore? Move to a place where it is on a going forward basis, and move to a place where that kind of issue, where we say you have to use memory safe languages. You have to have verification of your security, that your libraries aren't reaching out, that your blah, 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 right? That your supply chain is actually, at least vaguely intact, for Christ's sake. And how do we get there?
But I kind of go to my story number 26 about misconfiguration.
Yes.
And this, you can have the most memory safe language that you want. And there's always, so, all right, let's just say we're in this utopian society. We're all coding and developing software in memory safe languages. And then a researcher comes over to Black Hat and goes, yeah, this is how you get around it. Or the other thing to kind of even glom onto that, extend that, is there's misconfiguration. I don't know. It's
just a different word for implementation, which is a classic problem
in encryption as well, right? And I don't know if I didn't intend it this way. It was blurted out when I was inebriated on a previous podcast more than 10 years ago. When I stated, Larry,
yes,
you were absolutely 99% sure you were here for this when I said misconfiguration leads to compromise.
Yep.
Now
compromise leads to.
Oh yeah, there was a quote. We did
a whole thing.
There's a whole
thing.
We did a Star Wars spoof on this to bring it full circle.
Yes.
What's the answer, Larry? Compromise leads to?
Oh,
you don't remember.
Compromise leads to suffering.
Suffering. Yes. Yes.
Suffering it does. Yes.
So my story number 26 is basically the culmination of that, which is hilarious. Because I still feel today that misconfiguration does lead to compromise. That we can secure our software as much as we want, but put it in context. Someone will, in my other story, right? Someone will make an RDS snapshot and make it public. Someone will leave an S3 bucket and make it public. Someone will leave a web server misconfigured and there's redirects or whatever it is. And Synopsys did this research and they said
IoT will suffer it will. Yes.
Vulnerabilities in supply chain security and open source software components accounted for about a quarter of the issues. Vulnerable third-party libraries in use was uncovered to be 21%. But the rest of the article, so we established in a previous article, which is astonishing to me that you could basically not make up, but you could basically count things that relate to and support whatever product that you're selling. And so if you're a supply chain security company, you could say open source supply chain, software supply chain issues are a horrible thing and we all need to do that. Or if you're Synopsys and you want to promote the misconfiguration leads to compromise, you can say, supply chain's not so bad, but if you misconfigure your software, that's really bad. And that's exactly what's happening in my story number 26. And I'm not knocking Synopsys on that as well, because I think if they wanted to spin it as they can help with supply chain stuff, they can help with that as well. But that's how they spun it. And so there is this kind of gap in the research that is basically who wants to promote what product and what feature of what product is available in the market today, which is doing it a disservice. I think both are huge issues. I think you have a supply chain issue, certainly, as we've established, but I also think that you've got a configuration issue, which it kind of pains me because as Jeff worked at Tenable, and with like the configuration issue, Jeff, it's a solved problem. Right?
No, it's not.
No, well, there's solutions.
It could be. There's solutions.
There's solutions.
Yeah.
If I look at how do I look at my infrastructure, evaluate the configuration of my infrastructure, compare it to known standards, and produce a report, like we're going back to tech that Jeff and I worked on at Tenable 10 plus years ago, Jeff.
Okay.
Right? Like Mayhol's an amazing part. Mayhol and I worked hand in hand and was like, I want to evaluate my configuration. I want to compare it to known standards and I want to see the deltas. I was like, Mayhol, what you built was awesome 10 years ago. Imagine what Qualys, Tenable, and Rapid7 have evolved to today to be able to do that. This is like to me a solved problem. In my
it's
opinion.
a solvable problem.
Solvable problem that
so now would be a good
Synopsys
time.
goes and looks at like how have you misconfigured your stuff and is still finding that you've misconfigured your stuff. You have no excuse. There's no excuses for yourself.
So now would be a good time to bring up the PCI moment because I haven't mentioned it yet.
Let's go. PCI, baby.
Let's do my number 8.
Real quick.
Well, not moving on yet.
Before Mandy has to leave, they both Lee and Mandy would love to hit Lee's number 8. So just to end.
Well, let me make my point real quick, and then we'll jump on.
And I need
it's
an
a
ice
quick
cube.
point.
All right, hold on. Jeff, Mandy, Lee.
Well, Lee and Mandy at the same time.
So
Hold on. Larry, Ice Cube, Jeff, Mandy, Lee.
Yes.
It's a solvable problem. PCI version 4, which came out in March, which will start to become effective next year and the year after, is now going to require authenticated scanning, which we know from our time at Tenable, the authenticated scans really look more for configuration issues and not remote executable vulnerabilities. I'll keep talking, Paul, since you're choking to death. Keep the camera on me.
No, put the camera on Paul. No, I'm kidding.
But it's a solvable problem that a lot of companies like I work with, they're only going to do what they have to do, and they're about to be forced to, in the next year or two, start doing authenticated scans, which are going to expose configuration issues much more.
Jeff, why are they being forced? Who's forcing them?
PCI is forcing them.
Is that PCI version 4?
Yeah, version 4.
Okay, so what's the major change in this is they have to run authenticated scans against all servers, against what?
Well, anything that's within what they call the cardholder data environment, anything that's in scope for PCI will have to start having authenticated scans in addition to the unauthenticated, remote scans,
For-
and this
for-
is all internally.
And for the record, from someone who was born and raised in Massachusetts, the phrase card holder data is very difficult for someone from Massachusetts to say.
Why is that?
Because we put A's at the end of words where they don't exist, and we put R's on
Card
the
holder data.
Hold on.
They're card
You
holder
think
data.
CHD.
But you think that they're phishing. Card holder data.
Card holder. Card holder.
Card holder data.
Cod is delicious.
All right, Lee and Mandy.
So my number 8 story
No,
is
hold
about
on. I thought.
the
Go ahead, Lee. Lee. Okay, so
We're-
Lee and then Mandy.
Well, it's Lee
Sorry, Mandy.
and Mandy want to comment on this story together.
Yeah.
yes.
Okay,
So-
go.
This is about the World Cup coming up in Qatar, which requires all the visitors and the athletes to download 2 apps: a COVID tracking app called Itheras and the official World Cup app, Haya. They allow remote access to pictures and videos, make unprompted calls, modify device data, ask for full network access, unrestricted access to personal data, location data, and prevents the device from going to sleep mode and views the phone's network connections. What do you say? Shall we install those on your device, Paul?
No.
Then you don't get to go to the World Cup.
And there. But wait, there's more. The other piece Mandy picked up. Take it, Mandy.
Oh, well, I mean, they deployed with 15,000 closed circuit televisions throughout the 8 stadiums, and it's looking like people can be denied access based on the facial recognition technology. I don't know if you mentioned the part where they gain access to the device's photos, videos, and history with the right and ability to adjust it.
And this
I
one,
think
like I said, that
NSO
it kind
definitely got a new
of pissed me
contract.
off.
Jesus Christ, Tyler, you almost made me spit out my bourbon.
Is that after the NSO got the contract with the FBI to spy on U.S. citizens?
Yeah, well, that was because the FBI didn't actually go through with that, and someone already bought a yacht.
They
from
wanted
NSO.
to. They wanted to, according to one of my stories.
Oh, they did.
But
So
yeah, that's
the advice is to carry burner phones, but they estimate only maybe 20% of the people will, if that. And I'm worried when somebody gets a burner phone, they're just going to log in and put all their cloud-based data on it. So it's
not really a burner phone anymore.
So it's
No.
just like the Olympic Games in China and the games before that, and all of the times that we've went over this, and it always ends up in a lot of stuff
I want to
compromised.
go. I want to
and
go nostalgic, Larry. What was the Bluetooth worm vulnerability executed at a soccer stadium? My middle son is really big.
FIFA World Cup 2007, and it was a
Nokia.
Nokia. Yes.
What
Kabir.
was it called? Kabir. Oh my God! I knew
Yes.
you'd remember. Go look that up for those.
CABIR.
Yeah. Anyway.
Except this app is way more nefarious.
so-
The ability to
Yeah.
access a phone, I want to know how they're actually doing some of this at scale. This is truly an NSO level app to do this.
Right.
Tyler, I have a somewhat off-topic question. Do you watch the FIFA World Cup?
Yes.
Because you're a big soccer fan.
Yes.
How do you watch? Do you contact me offline? I want to watch it. I want to watch. We need to have a watch
Because you don't want to
party.
have to go to Qatar to.
Because here in the U.S.,
Qatar?
but here in the U.S., Tyler, it's hard to watch that stuff. No,
It's a little bit harder.
Yeah.
BBC or a lot of the European places, they'll do all the premier games. They have all of the games on all the time for free if you live in the region. So.
Need a VPN.
we need to collaborate on that.
yeah,
Because my kids are really
solve
into
a
soccer.
problem.
Yeah.
But I just want to know why they think this is acceptable behavior. I mean, it's not the first country to do it. It just seems, why isn't there a big hue and
it's
cry
Qatar,
saying, no, this is way beyond intrusive.
I mean, Qatar is always pushing that edge of privacy and personal boundary. I flew into Qatar during COVID, and we'll say the level of intrusion for COVID screening was another level.
You may feel a little pressure.
Yeah, and even on their own citizens,
Where did they put the
mandated
Q-tip,
and
Tyler?
tracked
Where did
if
they
you
put
went
the
home and
Q-tip?
isolated.
Just remember, Tyler, if you're bent over and the doctor's hands are both on your shoulders and you still feel pressure, there's a problem, okay?
It's a really big Q-tip.
Depends on if the hands are warm or not. Like, it makes a difference.
But
my
yeah,
God.
I mean, Tyler,
You win,
Tyler,
you win, sir. You win.
You're Tyler. You're absolutely right. Like, it's their country and they can do what the hell they want because of the,
Qatar does. Like, they play that game.
Same sort of thing with many of the other Middle Eastern countries. What rights do you have? And it's, you do this thing or you do this thing, and that's it. And that's terrifying.
It is, and even looking at the very first paragraph of that article, when it talks about the country's anti-LGBTQ policies, the deaths of thousands of migrants who built the venues, and there were suspicious circumstances under which Qatar was chosen. I wasn't aware of the suspicious circumstances around how Qatar was chosen.
That was so controversial.
Wait, what happened?
Really, I didn't hear anything about that.
Qatar, all the money that
You mean
was
FIFA is
planted.
corrupt? This is my
Did you say
shock
FIFA?
face.
This isn't Fido. FIFA.
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 FIFA? Whatever. I don't care.
FIFA.
There we go.
Look, some sports
that
ball.
Market
Sports ball and or team is corrupt? Oh my God.
Yeah, it's bad.
I've been to 2 World Cups, and I'm glad it was before all of this became like a thing. I'm very glad.
Next, you'll be saying that the Olympic committees run on money and political influence.
That just goes without saying.
Hold on. Josh, what's your take on the NFL then?
What sport is that?
That's football.
It's
but
the one with the puck on ice. Wait, no.
No, it's football, but not the football that we talked about with FIFA.
The American football.
American football.
Football American.
So I'll be honest, there's a significant amount of people. I actually dealt with the NBA. I've dealt with the NFL on a couple of occasions. I've dealt with NHL. I've dealt with a few different organizations in the sports world. And remarkably, most of the people in the headquarters, most of the people that work there are, they're lovely. They really do great work. I will give them a lot of credit.
But a lot of security built into that. It's interesting you say that, John. Quick, let's go off on a tangent. Like the telemetry you get from NFL players is a lot of embedded devices, and I think there's a lot of sport and
they call that IoT now, Paul.
IoT, more than one company collecting, putting sensors, I'm sure this exists in most professional sports today, but you see the lines that follow the puck in the NHL.
Yep,
you see
there's devices in
Major
the puck.
League Baseball.
Yeah.
The pitches.
AWS-AI, probability of a catch, right? Like they know the stats on the player, they know the speed at which the ball in the arc it's running, and how many throws this quarterback's done to this receiver. They have AI.
Does that translate into what we wouldn't call football here in the U.S., but we would call soccer? Does that translate into soccer as well, in FIFA as well?
As far as I know, yes. So most of the professional players in Premier League that's why they look like they're wearing sports bras when they take their shirts off, that's a telemetry vest.
Yeah.
It has burst speeds, acceleration, cut and V motion. This got all kinds of telemetry. So you start to wonder if
But all that's to promote the sport. Technology has to be secured to promote the sport, so that the viewer can get that telemetry to know how fast was that ball go.
Yeah.
I mean, this
Have you seen the
technology is so
NASCAR?
ubiquitous.
Have
We
you seen
went
the NASCAR?
bowling, and the bowling thing can tell me how fast I'm rolling the bowling ball.
But what happens if they can actually predict the win of the game because the AI has gotten so good at all of that telemetry and calculating all of those?
That's a
there's
stretch.
still human error, but we're getting pretty good.
Tyler,
That's a
your
stretch.
comment is what if?
No, but
There's no such
hold
thing
on.
as
In
coincidence.
NFL, predicting who's going to win in the NFL, I still subscribe to the any given time. I don't care how much tech you put on an NFL player. it's any given Sunday. I mean, I've watched football for a long time.
I knew that the Commanders were playing Monday night, and I knew they were playing the Eagles.
Oh my God!
And I'm like,
but that's a great example, Jeff. But you watch that game, and that is the quintessential, most recent example of. And I watched that game.
I forgot to watch it, and I'm like,
no, it's a great
and
game.
I found out the next morning. I'm like,
it was
man, that's the one game I should have watched.
Great game. It was an upset. Eagles were undefeated. Commanders won.
Yep.
But just an unbelievable
any given day,
any given Sunday, change of possession, the whole thing. It was great. It was great football. What we call in America football. It was a great NFL game. It really was. But underscores the point.
Paul's really playing to our international audience right here.
Right?
Seriously.
But underscores the point, like predicting with the AI. But also, let's talk about the tech that's on every single player and the integrity of that tech.
What about every stadium? Like how often people got up and left,
dude.
what bathrooms they hit, like cell phone telemetry. They leverage some pretty big tech for stadiums and
hell yeah, they do.
Stadium areas.
Oh, hell yeah.
But security
Even
with
in
that
college.
too. You don't want someone messing with the telemetry that's coming from a player on the field.
Hell, you don't want somebody messing with the telemetry from someone on the stands.
Exactly.
I
player,
between
right?
terrorists
Over the
density.
consumer, someone in
The
the stands.
telemetry is
That too.
not just coming from the players, though. There's a lot of telemetry
great point.
in devices in the stands too
Like
that
Disney-
are
like
taking
Disney
all
League.
kinds of readings,
Nope.
even in minor league.
Many of us
gear
are
up the
huge
stadium.
Disney fans. Like
The telemetry
when you
coming
go
from
to
our
a
Magic
Disney
fans.
park, when you go to Disney Park, it's the same kind of stuff. They're tracking
Yeah, but
every step.
Where do they
essentially.
buy those sensors from?
China?
China.
It's okay.
You
It's
wanna make
designed in
money?
America.
Fix a game with the sensors.
Yeah. Oh, that's very evil.
I don't know if you could fix a game.
I could.
Yeah, I don't know.
Change the heartbeat of the player. Change the heartbeat of the star player so it looks like he's on drugs.
Yeah,
They'll pull him off from the game. They'll pull him from the game. They'll run a drug test on him. He's out of the play for a few minutes. Do it to a lot of them. They'll
Or
start
an
pulling this-
indicator that
there's
he's had
ways you can
a
play with them.
concussion, so
Yeah,
they got to
make-
do the concussion.
No,
make that deceleration a little bit larger than it was to make him have an indication that he may have a concussion.
That's a great
Right.
point though. Is the telemetry tied to the health of the player,
I bet.
or is it still a physical exam? What I've seen in NFL, as an example, it's largely what I've observed is that it's a physical. It's not from the tech. It's from a physical exam.
But we don't really know.
I'll tell you right now. I know some folks that have had a concussion, and you do a physical exam of them at the time of when it happens, and they present as perfectly normal. You
Fine.
get 2 hours later, and dude thinks he's a monkey, and you take him to the emergency room, and they're like, "He's got a concussion." That's a true story for the record.
So think about this. Think about baseball. If you could hack the speed guns and some of the detectors that go with it, which would not be impossible, you suddenly have the star pitcher only pitching 80 miles an hour. They're going to pull him, and
No, it's a
might
great
just
point.
put in
Because there's
somebody
something
who's
wrong
not
with his
able to
arm.
close out the game.
But I think what we're talking about is an opportunity for fraud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I still don't think that's anywhere near the level we are with the World Cup. I think that's just crazy intrusive. We're just talking about with messing around with the stuff that's there.
Yep, you're talking about human rights violation questions.
Free opportunity
Right.
to install spyware.
And which will likely
Why not?
remain on the phones after they have left the World Cup.
I was saying it would be a nice
Not
service
even
for
spyware.
border
Not even
patrol
spyware.
to-
Just install a root certificate.
I mean, you could go the discreet route, but having the border patrol when we come back into the States, like we were just chatting about this on Discord, having a wiping app or a service or a cleaning scanning fee to take that off and ensure that what telemetry was leaked, make sure there's nothing additional on there. Like, does that help? Is that something that we would opt for the government to do? Is that something we should be doing to our citizens on return to protect our homeland and organizations that those funds are returning into? Like, that seems like something we should be thinking about.
Let's think about how many devices came back this year from Black Hacker Summer Camp that had the North Korean spyware.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember that story?
Mm-hmm.
I
The
can't see
Pegasus.
if there's facial recognition or not of what I'm saying. But I would assume, like, and then being in Qatar would be a lot easier to get even North Korean agents into Qatar as well. If that happened at Black Hat in Vegas, why wouldn't it happen on a much larger scale at Qatar?
I
And
just
they're-
wanted to transition to my story number 7.
We should probably think about wrapping up pretty soon.
Yeah.
Remember
Starlink
some-
user
Getting late.
Story.
Starlink user terminal mod chip.
This is
Covers how
Oh,
we
we've
manage
talked
to
about this.
execute arbitrary code on the Starlink user terminal using a custom mod chip that performs voltage fault injection.
Yep.
Wow.
So we saw initial of this a couple months ago, and I
Tyler?
I threw it there. I
This
knew
was
I threw it
a
in.
talk they referenced in the GitHub 3 months ago.
Yep. So DEF CON timeframe, and I know we had it in some stories about that, but we've actually got some more data. It looks like about because I remember when I scrolled through this GitHub repository, and I remember like that looks very familiar, and oh yeah, that's yep. I think the one that is fascinating about this is that their initial research was very, what I remember was kind of hodgepodge. You soldered some jumper wires and did this thing, and they had some initial board designs, but the board designs are now available. You can go and create your own.
And the design is it is slick. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I've hacked some hardware, and like these guys made this nice.
You've done. Tyler's done the original Xbox mod chips before, right?
Yeah.
Team Executor and all that fun stuff, right?
Oh gosh, yeah.
and I see, and I'm scrolling down, I'm like prerequisites, and I see D0, and I'm like, been there, done that.
Was that Tyler's handle on the underground? So the latest Darknet Diaries chronicles a criminal. Like I would like put the label on this person as a criminal, and he is very forthcoming in like, I am a criminal, like actual like crime and cybercrime things. He's like, I did all that. And this is part 1 of 2 that was released by Jack and Darknet Diaries. One of the things they talk about is he partnered with basically local GameStop outlets. Every time someone bought a PlayStation 1, they would ask them, hey, do you want like a mod chip on that so you can put pirated games on it? And a lot of people, I would imagine, were like, yeah, I want that. They would contact this guy that Jack interviewed to be like, oh, I can totally put your mod chip on that. I want to say for the original Xbox, there was a vulnerability in a game. What was the game? I can't think of it. There was a vulnerability in a game that you could hack
Was it GoldenEye?
Was it
Yep,
GoldenEye?
GoldenEye. It was GoldenEye.
It was GoldenEye.
Yeah.
I think so.
But there was also a chip that you could put on the original Xbox to do the same thing.
Yep.
And PlayStation
Or a
1
hard drive.
or hard drive, like
And both.
similar kind of hacks to do
Bye,
that.
Mandy.
So this dude was like, yeah, PlayStation 1s, I can totally hack
Bye.
those. Like, those are totally cool. I can
I
do
know.
that. And like,
Bye, Mandy.
I would
bye, Mandy.
I
From
would never admit that I maybe put a mod chip on someone to trade for tattoo work.
Oh
never.
my god!
I would never
yeah.
admit
Oh
that.
my god! Like, it was totally a thing. It was totally, our friend Bob totally did that. And
Burning SAT cards and for pay-per-view fights.
he also did that too, because what they said in the interview was that Canada said that it wasn't illegal in Canada to steal satellite stuff. So
Yep.
they were
to
hacking.
modify satellite encryption codes and rolling keys. It
Yeah,
was
so
not
he
illegal.
was like, yeah, $500. Send me $500. I'll mod the card. I'll send you in Canada. And no one's looking in Canada for any like there was a lot of non-cyber stuff in his story, but enough cyber stuff to relate it to things that our friend Bob basically has done in the past.
The irony is you talk about this stuff and you brought up the satellite stuff, and that I don't think so. I happen to be associated with some folks that did some of the satellite hacking stuff. And I remember when things started to get difficult, that I don't think they really realized what they were doing. But some of the ways that they were doing that was like when they were trying to program the card to get the data on it and it was protected.
But you're talking about a smart card.
They were
smart card.
They were literally
Yeah.
removing the card in and out a bunch of times while they were trying to program it.
They were
And
glitching.
they were effectively doing glitching physical glitching attacks
Yes.
that you now do with the
A lot
Starlink
of cool
stuff
yes.
in a processor with some timing and like, holy crap.
There's a great security cryptography, whatever, talks about the flip side of that. How do you protect, like,
Shared keys?
Jeff, through cryptography? How do you protect the integrity of access to content? It's basically DRM, right? But like, it's an interesting problem to apply cryptography to the problem of, I want an individual user that I know has paid to have access to this content. Therefore, I'm going to enable their smart card to have access to that content.
Right.
And this
Chat
other
companies
user that
did not
hasn't
understand
paid,
private keys.
yeah, like this other user that hasn't paid should not have access to that content. Turns out that's a really hard problem to solve.
I mean, I'll tell you right now, you think about some of the content that we cover in 617 from a wireless protocol perspective. There are 2 case studies that we cover there, which is Amiibo and some recent Disney stuff.
Yeah, it's DRM.
It's hard.
It's hard.
Like,
And hard means there's vulnerabilities in it that people can exploit.
and it's
basically.
not vulnerabilities in the individual protocols itself. It's the vulnerabilities in the implementation.
Yes, as Jeff and all of us have pointed, it's the implementation. Yeah. Security, cryptography, whatever, has a 2-part interview with Nate Lawson. It's a must listen. You have to listen to both of those. It is one of the greatest. They talk a lot about these issues because Nate was one of the experts or consultants brought in to help solve this problem. And Nate's like a really awesome person to try and solve these problems at that level. And I don't remember there's a woman who hosts that show that I can't remember her name. But I remember the other guy, Thomas Tachek, because we've interviewed him on the show, and we know him from cybersecurity. And I'm doing the woman on the show. I'm doing a disservice.
What's the name of the show?
Security, cryptography, whatever is the name of the show. So go look it up. And she is like,
I've heard of this.
Oh my God,
I feel like I've met her.
Oh my God, she is my hero. She is absolutely brilliant. Someone needs to look up her name.
We're working on
Deidre
it.
Connolly.
Deidre Conley.
Yep.
Deidre, thank you for presenting this content. She's amazing. Thomas is amazing. And there's another host on the show. I don't remember
David
his
Adrian.
name. Yeah. Go listen to that show. Oh my God. Every single episode, make sure you go listen to it. Because they talk about, and in the context of this, they talk about with Nate Lawson, like these DRM kind of style attacks. Amazing content. Good stuff.
Cool. We should probably think about
Yeah,
wrapping.
I don't know if I could top that. I just want to thank everyone for listening and watching this episode of Paul Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Ooh, really? Over and